Yeah, David's a good guy. That's
Yeah.
nice.
Does compliance
That's a nice
work
duo.
when it doesn't have power?
Does it work when it's unplugged?
Oh, dear God.
Okay.
Save me from
gee.
men jokes. All right. Joanne, keep going.
Okay.
Save us.
Yeah. So.
All righty, everybody. And we are a go. It is a Purview preview with Joanne Klein today. Yay, Joanne is with us. It's May 27th, 2026. The rest of the Sympraxis gang is all here, plus one, our honorary Sympraxian for the day, Joanne. So we'll introduce you to Joanne, and we're going to talk about what is modern compliance, and then we're going to talk about maturing into Purview, and then do a Purview 101, so getting you sort of started on what Purview is, some best practices along the way, and Joanne's going to give you a where to start checklist, which is awesome. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Joanne, why don't you introduce yourself to the fine Sympraxis fans that are on the show today?
My mom's not on the call.
Oh, darn it. Hi, everyone. I'm Joanne Klein. Happy to be on the Sympraxis webinar this week. And I am all about Purview compliance and Microsoft 365. So that's what I spend my day job doing. I blog at joanneklein.com, and I have a podcast with a fellow MVP, also in Purview, David Dreber at Compliance Unplugged. So happy to be here and talk about Purview.
Yeah, David's a good guy. That's
Yeah.
nice.
Does compliance
nice
work
duo.
when it doesn't have power?
Does it
No.
work when it's unplugged?
Oh, dear God.
Okay.
Save me from
gee.
men jokes. All right. Joanne, keep going.
Okay.
Save us.
Yeah. So I don't want to talk about Purview, first of all. I want to back it up a little bit or raise it up a little bit and talk about modern compliance, because it's outside of technology. It's technology agnostic, I should say. So it's modern compliance is really accomplishing a couple of things at a high level. One is certainly to meet your regulatory and business needs. So that's things like making sure you're keeping things for as long as you should and getting rid of them when you need to. When you're disposing of content, it's defensible. So a regulator likes what they see. Accountable record stewardship is a big one. And it's making sure that people are aware of the content that they work with. And then audit readiness is also another big one from a regulator point of view. Those things have been around for a long time, but it's also about managing information risk. And we're starting to see this more as AI is coming into the picture, certainly, but this has always been a part of modern compliance. Things like pretty simple things when they're stated, more difficult to actually execute and meet these questions or answer these questions. Knowing where things are stored, what does it contain, who has access to it, and most importantly, how is it being used? Now, organizations are, I think, confronted with a couple of key challenges in this area. One is you need to have visibility and accountability on what's going on across your environment. So monitoring activity, what is risky, what isn't, what don't you care about, what are you really going to focus in on, and then have the workflow processes in place to be able to investigate and respond to anything. Now, what makes this difficult is this includes a lot more than just business user activity. We're talking about AI agent activity now as well, privileged admin activity, like who's watching the privileged admin and the things that they're doing. Regulators care about that kind of thing. And automated system activity. If you're automatically applying labels, sensitivity or retention, how is that being audited? So devil's in the details there on activity, but there's a lot going on. And it's a balancing act. Balancing protection and productivity is challenging. You don't want to impede the business from doing their work and getting their job done, but you still need to protect and mitigate that information risk. So finding what the right balance of controls is kind of a constant battle and some tweaking that you have to do in the back end. Yeah, so that is modern compliance, technology agnostic, I would say.
Awesome. That's a great overview to get us started. And then Mark Anderson, I'm going to start calling Cashman. That's going to be the end of it. And Mark is going to be Mark Anderson. That's the decision I've just made off on the fly. All right. So Mark Anderson, then help us walk in. We're going to bring in the maturity model, which we do a lot, and sort of apply it to Purview and how it sort of layers on top of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem and how it sort of, layers in there. So talk to us about maturing into Purview, because I think there is some maturity model that we can apply to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think when Joanne and I have talked in the past, or when she goes through a slide like she just did, in the back of my mind, it's always information architecture. Mm-hmm. It's not just piles of crap that you want to monitor. It's got to be some sort of organization. And I think I think that a lot of organizations try to rush into using these Purview-based controls without having done any of that organization up front. And that's not a recipe for success. So if we look at the maturity model, sort of general march up the ladder, we tend to think about, at least at Sympraxis, we tend to think about Purview really becoming useful when you get to about level 400. You could discuss whether it's 300 or 400, but it's definitely somewhere where you're getting more organized. At level 100, you're barely keeping your head above water. You're reacting to all the problems. Your content is stored wherever. It might be a migration of a file share into one document library. We've certainly seen a few examples of that. You can't Purview that stuff. You can't apply much of these tools to it. At level 200, you might be having different sites for different purposes. You're starting to think, at least at the larger container level, where should certain content go and how should it be organized, and hopefully how should it be permissioned as well. Around level 300, you start to have a consistent information architecture. You're using things like content types and site columns, and organizing your content in ways that not in folders, but in ways where you've got metadata on those files, generally files or even list items, where it identifies what kind of content it is, so that you can then start to go at level 400 into Purview and say, okay, I'd like all the contracts to be kept for 4 years and then delete it. Or I would like to have everything that has a sensitivity label of, confidential, which happens to be applied to documents like strategy overviews, be sort of boxed off in a certain way. So until you can sort of say those sentences and be able to point to the content that those sentences reflect, Purview and most of what it does is just not going to help you much. And then, I think of best of breed as the whole organization gets it. It's not Purview, it's we're doing the right things in records management. We're doing the right things with data security. We're doing the right things from an auditability perspective. That education level, to me, is what gets you from level 400 to 500. It becomes a part of the fiber of the organization, as opposed to something that people like Joanne or some Microsoft 365 admins might set up in Purview that nobody's ever heard about. So that's my spiel, Joanne. I'm sure you disagree with everything I've just said.
No, I agree with it, and it drives home the point that you can't just start with Purview on top of a mess. I mean, Purview's good, but it's not that good, and it really is impacted in a significant way on the governance and maturity of your environment up to that point in time. full stop. There's no getting around it. Unless your
We're not to the
regulatory
point-
requirements. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, we're not to the point yet where the robots can do it for us.
No. And AI is not to the point where it can do it for you either. I mean, there still is some structure and governance that is required on the back end. It's getting better, but
I was going to say, we're going to talk about it later, but if you implement Purview too soon and then try to unroll it and delete it and remove it, if you don't have things set up correctly, it is almost impossible to pull that out. So you definitely want to make sure you're in the right spot in the maturity model before you start turning stuff on, because you'll pay if you turn it on too soon.
Yeah.
We
Agreed.
have some good questions in the chat, so I'll just read them out and see if we can. There's sort of two related. So Dan said, so to confirm, Purview can acknowledge custom metadata and react to it. And then Casper responded to that and said, what is custom metadata? Anything that we don't get out of the box. So that's sort of like a two-part question. Anybody?
I can answer part of that. I'm going to answer when custom metadata is anything that you don't get out of the box. So I don't know, a custom metadata, managed metadata column on a SharePoint library, you can absolutely apply a Purview retention label on content that matches. You cannot apply a Purview sensitivity label, to my knowledge, unless they've recently added that on the same thing. You can do a DLP policy on a piece of metadata. I don't see that done very often, but there's definite use cases for that. So those would be the main ones.
We've run through some scenarios together, Joanne, where let's go back to contracts. Maybe a contract expires in 2027. You can then have, when that date comes around, then a retention policy kicks in. Am I telling you something that is not true?
Yeah, that would be an event-based retention label. Yeah.
Right. But that kind of metadata is a way to help you really refine the tools that you use in Purview. I think that in many cases, and we've both seen examples of this, what compliance writes up as their rules for things like retention can be really hard to implement. But there are some ways to implement some of those sort of out-of-band kind of cases if you have good metadata that you can rely on.
Yes, 100% you can do it. It does require some, not only good metadata and good structure on the SharePoint side, but if, a simplified retention schedule or file plan to be able to implement that on the Purview side. So it's kind of those two worlds coming together. But unless you have that defined structure, in some cases on the SharePoint side, you just simply can't implement some of those very convoluted retention requirements I see in many retention schedules.
Yep. All right, let's move on. I think we're going to talk about some better practices and considerations later, so maybe we can dive into more of those. But moving on, Microsoft Purview, Joanne?
Yes. The control plane, that's a word that Microsoft likes to use, but this is the control plane for modern compliance. So this is how Microsoft implements it. They have placed their Purview solutions across 3 capability pillars. The thing to take away from this, I've denoted the different solutions inside of the different pillars, is many of these are integrated with each other. So these are not isolated solutions. They have, in many cases, touch points that are really going to impact kind of where you start in the order in which you enable these and what kind of alerts you're going to generate in the back end. And what I want to point out, I'm surprised Microsoft doesn't call this out in these pillars. Foundational to, I would say, almost all of these solutions is having a really good data classification in place. It's where your data is scanned and different sensitive information types are detected and stored as kind of hidden metadata, if you will, on the content. And the reason that's important is many of these features take advantage of that. They're kind of follow on after a really good, accurate data classification. examples would be DLP policy could block an external email from being sent externally if there's a credit card number found in it. Or you might apply a highly confidential sensitivity label if there is a bank account number found in a document. And there's many, many examples like that, but it's really important to start with a solid data classification system. Many organizations kind of just take what's there and proceed, but spending time on that is time well spent from my experience. Because your solutions are a little bit more intelligent and fine-tuned after the fact. So that's what I want to say about the solutions. Purview and AI integrations, because of where we're at with AI, I just thought this was worth calling out. There are, of course, some integrations, quite a few of them, as a matter of fact. There's some right within Purview, and that's to really help the Purview administrators. Purview can be really noisy in the back end, so it's helping them find risky, activity and be able to triage the alerts. So there's kind of that aspect to it, but there's also some other solutions coming into Purview, data security, posture management. It looks at not only regular activity, but also AI activity. So you're going to see touch points coming into Purview and lots of things that Purview can monitor. I do want to be crystal clear here, though, that AI governance is not just if you've got all the Purview stuff right, it extends into Microsoft Entra for identity and access. It extends into Microsoft Defender for monitoring threats that are coming from AI agents, and AI activity all up. So it's a complicated environment. Purview is one of those very big pillars, and it is part of the overall kind of security program, if you will.
I gotta think Agents 365 is sort of working its way in this
yes,
section too.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I didn't call that out, but I mean it's integration certainly with Purview, although it's currently accessed anyway within the admin center. But yeah, there's a lot going on here. So
no wonder you have to specialize in just one thing. This is a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. And there's changes in all of these happening all of the time, which makes it, a challenging area to be in. So admins in charge of Purview, it's a lot for them because they're getting now inundated with alerts and activities, and it's really hard to sift through, separate the wheat from the chaff, if you will, and that's why these Purview agents are coming into play as well, which I think is an excellent use case.
Yeah, 100%. All right, so we do have the where to start worksheet that we have next, and because I'm sharing the slides, if somebody wants to jump ahead and see what those look like, that's fine. But let's go through some better practices and considerations. So I'll read these off. If we have questions, we'll try to address those too in the chat. I think there's one more sort of large comment that I'm not quite sure how to turn into a question yet, but we can address that one. But and Todd, you referenced this a little bit earlier. Fixing IA is harder than building it, and turning Purview off is harder than turning it on. And I think those two pillars are, from a maturity model, it's the getting the IA right and doing it as best you can to start with, because fixing it is harder than building it. And, definitely, I'm going to make a statement around the idea of start small and build up, right? I feel like this is one of those small A agile type things where you should be like, let's take a scenario, a low-hanging fruit, be it contracts. Let's try to get our information architecture, our data storage paradigm solid around what we're going to do with all of that. Let's get our IA correct. And then maybe let's dabble on, and I don't know Purview like you do, Joanne. I would say I don't know it at all, but then dabble on some of the Purview things that we can do around how we want to retain and deal with those contracts, right? So that idea, does anybody else want to elaborate on what I'm saying on those 2 points? Anyone?
I think I think only to agree. I mean, jumping into the deep end of the pool here is not necessarily a good idea. In fact, it's generally a very bad idea. You want to start small. I just said this in the chat as well. You want to start small, make sure that you understand the tools, which gets to the third bullet. This is hard stuff. Joanne is an expert, and I can ask you a question, and sometimes you say, I don't know, and we have to figure it out together, right?
Yep.
So you really need somebody to own this stuff and to understand holistically what's going on, as opposed to, oh, we need a retention policy for 7 years, and now all of your content's locked down.
Yeah. And I see that all the time with organizations. I think just because you've enabled something or turned it on doesn't make you compliant, right? It's more nuanced and challenging than that. And sometimes that's an approach just to mitigate the risk until you figure it out. But the risk with that is, you push that problem down the road so far that it ends up being an operational problem. Is, your SharePoint sites are filling up because you're retaining everything, all of the changes and deletions forever, etc. So that's not a good model either.
Absolutely.
I was just going to add, because I'm definitely on this call as a learner, the two slides that are separate but really coming together, the maturity model isn't just a way to identify where are we in our journey. It is definition of a good way to go through the journey, which then leads us to this next slide. And for my purview, that's a really nice, process, because I don't know, just in the learning mode, hearing that it's okay to not be in the purview zone just yet, but to get ready for it. And I would also think a customer would have to be really dedicated to no, we really do need to get to leveraging purview because of all the benefits of it. But if we don't do it right, then we're in trouble.
Yeah, and I think that next bullet there that we've sort of said, but I'll say it again, is the data governance is complex, and you have to have somebody own it. I think that a lot of organizations, they think, well, I didn't have a Microsoft 365 admin, I just wing it, and that's fine. So now that I need this purview stuff because some government agency or some compliance thing that I need to adhere to, that seems like the best way to do it, and I'll just slap that on top. That's a place where you can't do it. You might be able to farm out your Microsoft 365 admin stuff to a MSP or a consulting company that wants to, help you get it set up. And then, in general, you set it and forget it, I think, where the purview piece feels like not that at all. Like you literally have to have an FTE that is in charge of understanding this at least some percentage as well as Joanne does, and or understand your organization well enough to apply it in some way, gets the help they need if it's from an outside consultant to understand where they're going, and then that's their journey and that's their sort of goal is to be on top of that. I think
I was going to ask Joanne that exact question. With the organizations you work with, have you seen mostly that there is someone, or an individual or a small group, really accountable for that stuff? Because I would think over time, your business changes, risk could evolve. Like there's a lot to it, and like Julie said, it probably isn't that set it and forget it kind of mentality. Do you see that a lot, that they have that in place as part of this journey? Or
I would say yes, but you have to remember the clients that come to me generally they've already realized that they want some purview expertise. So it may not be formal, but most of them do have some kind of a steering committee, maybe a key decision maker, and then kind of a team underneath. I would say yes, and and that is absolutely required. There are many kind of hard decisions to make, and you don't want to leave that to the poor purview administrator that's just in there creating retention labels. I mean, that is not really their decision to make, somebody in IT. It's a much more elevated strategic plan and approach that needs to happen on all of these things, and that needs to be done with somebody like a key role, steering committee. Just having that role in place is critical, and I'm seeing it more over time. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to lean into a question that Rob posted here, and we'll end up having to be quick on the next slide, but let me read what he wrote, and then I think the question is in the meat here. So a pet peeve of his is legal retention is at the minimum duration a record must be kept based on a trigger to start the timer, creation, replacement, retirement, etc., but should then invoke a risk-based decision on the value of the data versus the cost, storage, e-discovery, clutter, etc., or other liability. So he's asking essentially, how do you use Purview to trigger such a review process and enable an easy and appropriate data end of life, which may just be more than delete, like purge or destroy? So he's essentially like, how do we do this end of life stuff in a way that we can interact with it for the, it's like site ownership governance, which we talk about all the time, but this is a little bit more than that. This is, do we keep this piece of content? There's some human in the loop review, I think is what Rob is asking.
Okay, if I'm understanding the question correctly, there is capability in Purview to do it, and then I'm going to talk about the pros and the cons of it. First of all, it is critical that whoever is configuring these controls back in Purview can liaise with the decision-making governance team on the implications of some of these decisions. As soon as there needs to be a human review in the process, that means it has to be a retention label applied to the item. So this is a very granular retention control. It needs to be configured for whatever retention period is required, limitations on that a little bit. And then at the end of that period, it needs to go through a disposition review that a human would do. The implications of that is that this is not at a site level, a folder level, a document set level, a library level. This is at a document level or an email level, very granular. So if you kind of think of some of the libraries that you work with, this is a lot of manual review that's going to have to happen by a human. Certainly doable, but that is how Microsoft has implemented that. They have a few other options. You can run Power Automate Flow at the end of that. You can do some other things, but the main one is this disposition review. Now, records managers I talk to don't love this model simply because it's too granular. They are used to, in classic records management solutions, being able to review something. They call it at a case level, a case being everything in a document set, everything in a folder. So your content is organized in that way on the SharePoint side, and you're reviewing it holistically. That model kind of makes sense to me, but that's not how Purview works today anyway. So that's kind of the long and the short of that.
I suppose you can build custom solutions around it.
Yes.
If you can trigger some other process at the end, you could basically create your own, maybe UX or whatever, to sort of create a solution on that.
Yes, you absolutely could. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So we got to our where to start. Is there anything you want to talk through on this slide, Joanne?
Yeah, I think the key takeaway here is, because I'm getting asked this a lot on row 3, prepare for AI apps and agents. This is not where you start. The foundational piece is, number 1, clean up what you have. So this speaks to SharePoint information architecture and all of the issues, oversharing, all of the traditional issues that are there, cleaning up rot. Then start with Purview fundamentals, because they help inform many of the controls you have for AI apps and agents. So you can't start on row 3 without having dealt with row 1 and the fundamentals of Purview, in my humble opinion. And then I just want to call out, this is more than just technology, because things can go sideways in a hurry if you're just deploy sensitivity labels and a bunch of policies, and you haven't thought of how is this going to impact people when they're trying to do their job. So multiple threads I just wanted to pull there.
Awesome. That's a great starting point for people just starting on the journey. I agree. All right, we have some resources, and Mark Cashman has been posting them in the chat for you. Thank you, Mark. And so we have Joanne's starting guide for compliance with Microsoft Purview, and her blog who was it in the chat? Somebody just, Mark Chrisman, I think, just said, yeah, in the chat, refers to your blog all the time, Joanne. So, and then your podcast with David Drever, and learn more about Purview. That's a Learn article. And then if you want to know more about Joanne, you can absolutely check out that partner article that Mr. Cashman helped us put out there, and the maturity model for Microsoft 365, which we've linked to about 1 billion times. And we're coming up on 1 o'clock. June 10th is our next episode, and we're going to get to know SharePoint Advanced Management. We've done a SAM show before, but we're going to do it again because a lot has changed, and so there's a lot of new stuff to share. In the meantime, join us live. We will be at TechCon 365 in Chicago. A whole group of us, Sympraxis 200, will give you a $200 discount off of that. That's in June. And then TechCon Seattle will be in August, and that's in Seattle. And we'll be getting a code for that. So if you're interested in going, if you can wait a little bit, we'll get you that code for 200 off.
The code's the same.
Oh, and it will be the same. Yeah, that's a good point. And then, of course, Collab Days New England. Yay! We are almost done reviewing all the submissions that we've had. So we'll be getting an agenda out in the not too distant future, and then we'll be opening up registration. Sponsors, we really need you out there. So if anybody's listening to this and their business might want to help us put this show on, we would love to have you reach out to any one of the Sympraxians, but Derek is our go-to for vendors. So if you want to sponsor Collab Days New England, we'd love to have you. And that's Friday, October 16th, 2026 in Burlington, Mass. Awesome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Joanne, for joining us.
Thank you, Joanne.
Wonderful to have you. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask Sympraxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.